In this video, we're going to explore mixed costs, right? The concept that there are certain costs that have two components. They have a fixed cost component, but they also have a variable aspect that changes depending on the operations and the activity level of the company. So one of the methods we could use is something called the high-low method. This looks at the total costs incurred at the difference of that between the high and low levels of activity, and allows us to classify or pull out, if you will, the fixed cost from the variable cost. So the differences in costs between high and low levels represents variable costs, since they're the only costs that can ultimately change as activity levels change. So let's see how this formula might work, right? So the first thing we need is we need to determine the variable cost per unit. So the total change in costs divided by the difference between the high and low activity level will give us the variable cost per unit. Again, this is the idea here, is that there is a difference in costs at different activity levels. But the only thing that can be different between those two levels is the variable cost aspect. So let's look at this example. So we have in January, we had the least amount of miles driven was 20,000. And at 20,000 miles driven, the total cost was 30,000. Now we also then want to find the maximum miles driven. So the maximum was 50,000 miles, and the total cost at that level was 63,000. So if you take the change in costs, 63 minus 30, that's the 33,000. Divide that by the differences in activity levels, 30,000. The variable cost per unit for this particular company at this particular activity index is $1.10 per mile. So how would we figure this out? Here we have our costs. The high level, the total cost was 63,000. At the low level, the total cost was 30,000. So 50,000 units at $1.10 per unit is $55,000. 63,000 minus the 55,000 tells us that the total fixed costs were $8,000. At the low level, 20,000 miles at $1.10 is 22,000. 22 from 30, we're still at 8,000. So this method allows us to extract the difference, the variable cost per unit, to the fixed cost, the total fixed cost. So how would we apply this to the business? If we expect 45,000 miles next month, what is the total cost of that? So the fixed cost we know is $8,000. Then $1.10 times 45,000. The total cost, $57,500. And of course, part of that is fixed and part of that is variable. So why is it important to segregate these mixed parts? If we're going to change our pricing mechanism, we need to understand how is that going to affect profits, right? Variable costs, the total variable cost will not change, but the variable cost, the total variable cost will change. So in order to make a profit, if we cut our price, we either have to increase the number of passengers, increase our activity index, or we need to cut our variable costs, right? The fixed cost will not change. So we need to be able to segregate this variable and fixed part so we understand how we can manage our costs at different levels of activity. Again, I hope you like this video. It was a little quick. What But we'll move on to some more complicated cost, volume, profit analysis in future videos. Goodbye.